Fish on First has partnered with About the Fans to launch a merchandise collection. Rep the FOF logo and more Marlins-inspired apparel. Find it all at aboutthefans.com. Enter coupon code FOF10 at checkout to get 10% off your order. FOF10 for a 10% discount.
This is Xavier Edwards, and you're listening to Fish on First Live.
Welcome to FOF Live, starting the shortest homestand of the season. Just the one series back at home for the Marlins coming off a week-long road trip. We're presented by About the Fans. They're our merch partner for all our FOF needs, just like this and other Marlins-inspired designs. More stuff coming because the Agustín Ramírez era is here, and I think he's going to be a fan favorite pretty early on. So we're going to dive all into that, the call-up timing, the ramifications of it, what the Marlins have been doing lately, what they got coming up next, with Nate Karsmer, with Sean McCormick. He's back out from his garage. Last time he was on stream, he was in his garage. But as he explained to me, got his normal setup again. So a whole lot to get to here on the show. Fill up the comments as always. Happy to feature them on the program and answer all your questions as we can, as we get through to them. Going through everything that's happening, counting down to first pitch of every single series. We do these streams, so check in, and we appreciate all you guys supporting what we do. Looking back first at the previous series against the Phillies, an entertaining one, all things considered, and a whole lot of storylines coming out of this. I guess we could start at the end, though. We could start with the positive, Sean. The final game, Marlins win 7-5 to salvage a game, to stop a 5-game losing streak, and almost all the offense comes from Javier Sanoja. He's a guy that does a lot of things well, adds a lot of versatility. The only thing you don't expect from him ever is to hit for power, and he ends up hitting a home run in such a consequential situation to give the team the lead. They end up giving back that lead, but then pulling ahead for good in extras. Easily Javier Sanoja's best game of the year, and he's one of those guys that is gradually getting more and more playing time right now. But I think you'd probably as surprised as everybody that he hit a home run in that situation to totally flip that game around, right?
Yeah, I thought, honestly, for me, that was one of the more exciting moments of the season so far. For me, that's up there with the walk-off on opening day and the Griffin Conine home run, Rob. I thought it was so unexpected. I was watching, I couldn't believe it. But that's awesome. Sanoja's, honestly, the numbers are much better than I think some people would expect based on what we saw last year in his couple of tee-up in the majors. I think his OPS right now is in the 800s. He's played every position besides catcher at some point already in this season. He's been a super utility piece for the Marlins. So it's awesome to see Sanoja get off to a good start, and for the Marlins to be rallying, which they also did in the Cal Quantrill game, the game 2 of the series. Unfortunately, they came up short there in the 9th inning, but the bats get hot late. Hopefully they can get off to a better start though.
And you did touch on the starting pitching. I know, Nate, you weren't necessarily around for a ton of this, but you can see the results, and you've been following it all season long. This rotation's been one of the worst in baseball. The exception has been Max, who's going again tonight. He's been so consistent and so good. But this was one of Sandy's worst starts in recent memory. It's more of the same from Quantrill, even in the game they won with Gillespie yesterday. He puts him in an immediate hole with his struggles and just labors through 5 innings. This was supposed to be maybe not the strength of the team, but one that had the most upside if everything went right. And so far, basically everything except for Max is going wrong with the rotation that they have.
Yeah, two of the, I thought the 2 safest guys in the rotation between Sandy and Cal, they've just really not had it so far this year. I'm not going to hit the panic button on Sandy just yet, especially coming off Tommy, but I am getting a little bit worried about Cal, man. It's just not what we've seen. I guess if first half last year in Colorado, it's been more on par with that, but when you bring in the veteran guy, especially one of the only impact guys they signed in the offseason, not what you want to see for him. And Sandy, he just can't roll any ground balls, man. That's been the strength of him since he's been a Marlin. He can't roll any ground balls. He's getting hit. He's going to hit way too hard and too much in the air, and he's still, command is not all the way there. I think he walked 2 on Friday, so it's still not looking like the Sandy that we know. More like 2023 Sandy, to be honest. unless he was serviceable, he got through it somehow, and the Marlins found a way to win. So that'll do. But I think, yeah, Matz has been the best guy so far. I don't think anyone could have seen that coming. So hopefully keeps it going this series against the Reds.
Yeah, hold on a moment. I want to pull up this crazy graph quickly on the starting pitching. And you can see right now that I was one of the few that swerved in the series and thought the Marlins might be able to steal it. But as it turns out, no, not the case. The Phillies are able to win 2 out of 3. Sanoja would have been the MVP if somebody had picked him, and nobody did, of course, and kind of reasonably so, given the lack of consistent playing time that he's been getting so far this year. But shout out to everybody that had their perfect picks for this previous series. When it comes to the starting rotation, yeah, I just wanted to pull up the fact that Max is the only guy that's going deep into games under any circumstances for the Marlins this year. The 3 longest starts for the Marlins this season are all Max. Each of his last 3 starts. Nobody else has completed 6 innings. These are the only starts that have gone beyond 5. Anybody that's gotten out in the 6th inning, and there's Max's other one right there. So that's been causing this carousel in the bullpen for people. We'll get into it a little bit about how they've just had to go through a lot of arms already back there. It's because the bullpen's had such a heavy load to try to lift so far to bail out these starters, even when they're kind of effective, just not going deep into games. Something that's it's definitely not going to be sustainable in the long term unless Max continues to really defy expectations and do everything on his own right here. And Sandy's the guy that we're relying on, obviously historically, to eat those innings. And you could say some of it is him being on a tighter leash coming back from Tommy John. Some of it is just he's simply not getting enough outs. He's just not effective enough that you'd even trust him to be effective the 3rd time through an order. I did want to have a little update on Griffin Conine, though. That was a really sad storyline from the series. Conine on what seemed to be a pretty routine slide into second base. He ends up dislocating his left shoulder. And it's a bad sign. Whenever somebody goes immediately on the 60-day IL, whenever within a few hours they're ready to rule somebody out for the next 2 months, that tells you that this could be a serious long-term injury. This is from him just earlier today saying this is the only time that he's had this kind of significant injury of any kind during his whole baseball career. So saying that never thought he'd be making a post like this. I felt sorry for myself in the ambulance leaving the stadium, asking myself how and why this could have happened to me. But I believe everything happens for a reason, good or bad, and I know I'll find a way to grow from this mentally and physically and come back a better version of myself. Yeah, so saying all the right things. We don't know specifically about what the road back for him is, but I think it's a possibility where he might not come back at all this season. So, Sean, just your final thoughts on what we saw from Griffin early on this year as a guy that was really overlooked as a prospect due mainly to his strikeout issues, and yet like for a big chunk of the season, even he'd really emerged as close to an everyday player for this team because he was just looking like a more complete hitter than we thought he had been coming up through the system.
Yeah, I thought it's been really impressive his start to the season, and I think his big worries as a player coming up were his splits against lefties and his chase percentage. And if you look at how he's performed, and actually most Marlins lefties this season so far, which is an interesting storyline, have performed pretty well against lefties, and so has Conine. And he cut his chase down, which is allowing him to hit the ball harder, more consistently. It's in the air while playing good defense. So it's really sad to see, because I believe he was evolving into this everyday player and not just a platoon-only outfielder. So it's really sad to see him go down. And I hope that he comes back, healthy from the shoulder, and hopefully it doesn't end up like a Brian Anderson situation that after his shoulder injuries, he never quite was the same player.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's a really doomsday scenario to bring in the VA comp. That you're right. That was a shoulder issue too, and I guess that is something to keep in mind about how complicated it is to come back from that, even as a position player. And we'll go to Isaac right now. Now that we've covered the previous series in a lot of detail, we have 2 representatives at the ballpark, Kevin Burrell and Isaac too, for a whole lot going on. I guess the logical place to start is with Agustín, and not only his press availability, but I know I spoke to Kevin one-on-one. So tell us everything we should know about the Marlins' new catcher.
Yeah, well, Agustín Ramírez, first things first, the first thing that we mentioned that the whole coaching staff mentioned was that how hard he worked in spring training on his English, and that was evident in his pregame scrum and his interview with Kevin Barral. He also mentioned, or manager Clayton McCullough mentioned that he and Liam Hicks would basically be splitting time 50-50 behind the dish. He did not confirm nor deny whether he'd get any time at first base, but I have to assume he would. I don't know if at DH, because if, God forbid something happens to one of the catchers, the DH sort of makes it a sticky spot. You might lose a DH and pitchers might have to hit. But I think there is a world where you see Augustin play some first base and see him in the lineup pretty consistently, honestly.
Yeah, so he has some family in attendance for this first game, even on kind of short notice?
Yeah, both him and Ronnie Simon. Augustine mentioned that his 2-year-old daughter, Eileen, is going to be here, along with 10 to 15 family and friends. And then Ronnie Simon also, he has his wife and a whole bunch of family and friends as well in attendance in the ballpark. And I'm going to post this interview shortly. But my interview with Ronnie Simon was a really fun one. He sort of shared the story about how he was told of his call-up and his flight to Philadelphia. And I strongly recommend everyone listen, because it was actually a really intriguing story that I hadn't heard before. I don't know if FanDuel mentioned it. I know Miami didn't have a ton of media up in Philadelphia for his debut, even though he didn't play yesterday. But Ronnie Simon is a very outgoing character. The comp I got was Emilio Bonifacio, personality-wise, with Ronnie Simon, a very cool guy. And I suggest everyone listen to that one.
Well, now that you brought him up, he was one of your guys in the call-up contest. Augustine was one of mine, checking in on these picks we made a few months ago. This was, I think, right at the start of spring training or something like that, in terms of guys that would debut this year. How are you feeling about the rest of your roster there, among the 3 that haven't debuted yet?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Victor Mesa Jr., he should have debuted last year. Obviously, he got hurt. And then this year, right away, got hurt in spring training. I think it's fair to say that he probably would have been up at some point, maybe instead of Ronnie Simon, had he played the whole first month with AAA Jacksonville. He is set to come back at some point soon, so I still feel strongly about Victor Mesa Jr. making his Major League debut this year. Troy Johnson, I think he's one injury away to Matt Mervis or an Eric Wagaman, Kyle Stowers, even someone gets hurt. I think Troy Johnson is that next man up. He's finally hitting the ground running in AAA. He's on a hitting streak. I'm not sure how many games, but he is hot right now. And Dale Stanovich, I mean, hey, they brought up Cade Gibson. So I got to assume that Dale's got a shot to make an appearance. Miami is still going with one left-handed pitcher in the bullpen, which I just do not think it's a recipe for success. I know that Cade only threw 34 pitches, I think it was, so you could have just had him be down today, and use him tomorrow and Wednesday. But no, they brought back Mr. George Soriano. So the one lefty in their entire pitching staff doesn't seem to be an issue for the Marlins.
Well, Nate, I want your input. If you could handicap it for us. So Isaac and I were kind of the leaders in this race so far. He's got VMJ, Troy, and Dale Stanovich. I have Matt Pushard, Jacob Berry, Nigel Belgrave. Who do you think has the better shot at actually going 5 for 5 here?
I think Isaac has it right now. I'm not going to lie. I think, like you said, with Troy, I think he's just one injury away. I do agree with that. Victor Mesa, I'm pretty much all with Isaac on that. I'm not sure if Stanovich, Eli, I would maybe lean more towards you, but I don't think JJ Berry comes up this year, to be honest, or Belgrave. So I think it's going to be close between you two. Carver and Kevin are really slacking so far this year. But if I had to be if I'm a gambling man, I'm going with Isaac right now.
I just can't believe Robbie Snelling was number 1 overall pick. I do think he's going to
be
that. But when you have a guarantee Rule 5 guy on the team, I don't know how he doesn't go number 1.
It's a free point.
That's crazy. That was a gift.
It was, yeah. I'll say on Barry is that he gets off to slow starts every year, and then he comes in late and earns a promotion. He's somehow done it each of the last 2 years, earned a midseason promotion by heating up. I don't know how. I don't know what the path looks like, but I have blind faith in him to flip the switch when the weather heats up.
I'm not gonna lie, though. Kevin could backdoor with De Los Santos. Marcy's been playing really well, and Acosta. Well, Acosta's been slumping recently, but hey, I'm not gonna lie, Kevin. I might have worried you out too early, man. I apologize if you're listening.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Kevin, he laid out all the injury updates that we had from today, so I just want to roll through those pretty quickly. With Declan Cronin, it's good news that he's resuming baseball activities. He had a setback last week, so I guess there's still hope for him to come back in the not too distant future. From his hip injury, depending on how that goes. The first time that I've seen Braxton's name in here since the season started, even though we're not expecting him to pitch at all this year, coming back from elbow surgery. I guess this is a very innocuous update. The big one here is Yuri through live BP today. Do you have anything additional, Isaac, from Clayton or anybody else about Yuri looked and how close he is to maybe going on a rehab assignment?
Yeah, it was close to 60 pitches today, 4 to 5 ups, what they like to call it. I think you could look at a mid-May, late May rehab assignment down in Jupiter. So that he is progressing very nicely, if anything, a little bit ahead of schedule. And it is nice to see him throw that many pitches. Like you mentioned, Eli, it is strange that so many pitches are being thrown. I still don't think that they're 100% intensity yet, but he is out there on the major league mound facing live batters. So nevertheless, it's a good sign.
Yeah. And Ryan Weathers tomorrow throwing live BP. So
Yes.
I imagine we'll get some footage of that. He's going to be closer to returning than Yuri because Weathers isn't even on the 60-day IL. They've still left the door open for him to come back within the next month, potentially, depending on how things progress. And then Derek Hill, he's an interesting – don't forget about Derek Hill. He was slumping before going on the IL, but that seems to be a relatively short-term thing with his wrist. So don't get too used to the current outfield alignment because when he comes back, how he slides in there, that's going to be an interesting wrinkle right now. For the moment, I guess it's a pretty straightforward outfield situation right now where it's a lot of Jesus Sanchez, it's a lot of Kyle Stowers, it's a lot of Dane Myers, and then you have Javier Sanoja filling in some of the spots in there, and Ronnie Simon as well. Hey, Danny.
He says hello to you guys. And he's very happy about Javier Sanoja's career day.
Right. And on Ronnie Simon, I just find it hysterical that he's DHing in his first game because that's kind of the reason why he was brought up in part is because of his versatility. So I don't know. Is there any sort of explanation in terms of why he would not be playing a position at all in this first game?
There was not. It wasn't even asked. I can only assume that you don't want to take one part of his game, sort of have him focus offensively in his major league debut. I guess hasn't had the time to acclimate to Lone Depot Park's outfield quite yet. If I were a betting man, I'd assume he's in the outfield tomorrow. He mentioned in the interview that he is playing. The team has told him that he's going to be playing specifically left field for the most part, maybe some infield here and there, but they called him up to play left field. So I could see a world where he worked on it pregame today. He was only working with the outfielders today, nothing with the infielders before the game. So I would assume he's in. You see him playing position number 7 tomorrow.
Right. I guess last thing, just on the Reds, this is going to be a very fascinating matchup as we'll get into later in the show, Isaac, with the fact that they have Ellie De La Cruz in the middle of it all. But in general, this is a Marlins team that's been so bad at stopping the running game from opposing teams. And now they have one of the most ambitious base stealers in baseball going up against, as we've covered leading up to his call-up with Ramírez, somebody that has defensive shortcomings, that is prone to pass balls, and that it can struggle even in base stealing situations. I feel that's probably going to be a major factor over these next 3 games in terms of how the Marlins, if they make any sort of adjustments, both behind the plate and on the mound in terms of controlling base stealers and not giving away those free bases.
Unequivocally so. I don't think that Max is quite as slow to the plate as guys like Cabrera and Sandy are, but man, it's going to be an issue. I know Clayton McCullough mentioned it pregame about Ellie De La Cruz specifically. He seems to be a lot more optimistic and his pitchers learning quickly about how to change tempo and change timing and step off when they need to. But to me, I think this could get really ugly really quick. I think a walk Ellie De La Cruz could turn into a triple very quickly. So we're going to see how that plays out, but I think that's going to be a huge storyline all series long with not just De La Cruz. The Reds have some other ambitious base runners as well. And with Ramírez, I would think that Ramírez catches today and Wednesday. I think he's off tomorrow. What I would totally guess, total speculation, I'm not certain. But yes, with Sandy on Wednesday, Cabrera tomorrow, things could get pretty dicey on the base paths again, sort of how it was against the Diamondbacks. So that'll be something to keep an eye on.
Very good. Paul, Isaac for update from the ballpark, and Kevin as well against the Cincinnati Reds. A little 3-game homestand right here. Thanks a lot, Isaac. And
thank you for having me.
We'll take it the rest of the way. Got to spend a lot more time on Agustín, of course, as he's up now, and he may be up for good. We'll have to see how it plays out, but This is a guy that was somebody number 3 on our prospect list entering this season. Some highlights that Kevin put together of him at AAA Jacksonville. He has this really distinctive finish to his swing that I think people are going to be emulating and really drawn attention to as he goes about his career. As somebody that generates power to all fields, the exit velos are really top of the chart, and it's about that balance of both power and decent plate discipline that's got him to this point. He's a pretty big believer in his bat. For you, Sean, what are your sort of expectations for him? I guess, before getting into the defense and being too critical about that, how does he compare to some of the hitters that are in this Marlins lineup? They've gotten decent results without him, but he's a guy that his ceiling as a hitter seems to be right up there with anybody that they currently have.
Yeah, it's a nice change of pace to hopefully have more of an offensive-minded batter for the first time at the catcher's position since I guess maybe Jorge Alfaro had expectations to be that, but definitely JT Realmuto. But even he was a great defender. But it's really nice to have that. I'm just hoping and looking for Agustín in the major leagues to show that patience, that plate approach that he does have in the minor leagues, and hopefully that he's not chasing too much, which I have belief that he'll be, focused and not chasing too much just because of how everyone else around the Marlins have been so far, just very patient approach at the plate. So I think if Agustín brings that to the major leagues, he's going to adapt really well. He has the power to play on Lone Depot and really anywhere. It's just, not striking out, getting on base, and he's going to be a really productive hitter. I could see, like a 110 OPS plus. If he plays a full season in the major leagues, I think he's that type of catcher.
The timing of this not totally coincidental. We should have mentioned that Rob Brantley, his 35-year-old body gave out and he hurt his shoulder. That's why he's going on the IL. Looking at this call-up, I had mentioned before that it was just a week and a half ago that the deadline passed for the Marlins to get an extra year of club control on him. By keeping him in the minors just long enough, it means that he's now, for the next 7 seasons, the rest of this year and the 6 after that, won't be able to hit free agency. So he'll be right past his 30th birthday by the time he's eligible for free agency. That's going to be a factor here too. Well, Nate, is it too crazy to think that if he has the potential to be one of the more productive rookies in the National League this year, or does he have any chance, you think, of making a surprising push into the NL Rookie of the Year conversation just with his offensive upside if he ends up batting in the middle of their lineup for the rest of the year?
No, I think he's going to be extremely productive. I concur with everything Sean says. I think he's very mature at the plate for his age. I just not sure he's going to get all the at-bats. Maybe not at catcher, but, if he hits, he's going to stay in the order one way or the other, so either at DH or at first. I'm very, very interested to see how he does behind the plate. I think that doesn't really factor too much into if you're thinking about Rookie of the Year voting, but it definitely is going to factor into whether he plays back there or not. So I think he's going to do – it might take him a couple days, couple games to figure it out at the big league level, but I think he's going to rake, man, honestly. Doesn't strike out too much for having so much power, and like you said, Eli, he just hits the ball so incredibly hard, man. He had that first couple weeks within spring training. He had the rope, and it was like 115, 116 off the bat. It was an absolute laser. Then he had of course the bomb against the Braves that I got to see, and that ball was crushed. It just sounds different off his bat, man. So I'm so excited to watch this guy, and I think it's big for Peter Bendix because he traded away a fan favorite in Jazz to get this guy and Cerna and Abraham Ramirez, but this is going to be big. I think if he immediately shows results that, I'm not going to say that anyone bailed out on him just yet, but he did a lot of fans who maybe weren't feeling good about it back on the bandwagon. So I'm looking forward to it, and I think he's going to do great. So Rookie of the Year, maybe in the cards. Just depends what he does behind the plate.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Jazz and the way that he arrived here in the first place. Part of that 4-player deal, along with Jared Cerna and Abraham Ramirez, no relation. And he's doing pretty well in Jupiter right now. Meanwhile, Jazz, of course, he had a strong finish to his year last year with the Yankees, including all the way to the World Series, playing every single day. A lot of that at a new position in third base. Things got off to a good start. And then this year, opening weekend, he hits 2 or 3 home runs. He's one of the faces of the torpedo bat movement early on. And now if you look at it, he's hitting 157. He's only added a few home runs since then. Not doing much when he doesn't hit home runs. He's it's interesting where all of a sudden now his numbers are kind of back down. Well, at this point, it's a slower start than he's ever gotten off to at this point in his career. Meanwhile, Agustín is in the majors. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I think it's just the perfect storm on it. So like you said, Jazz has been struggling a lot since the whole torpedo, first week crushing baseballs. But if Augustine comes up and balls out, man, and Jazz continues to slump, I think there's going to be a lot of praise for Peter Bendit, especially not even just getting him, but like you said, the other Ramirez who's doing really well in Jupiter, and Jared Serna, who had an amazing second half last year. So I think it's a perfect storm right now for Peter Bendit.
Yeah, almost perfect. If we want to be fair here, Serna's gone off to a slow start in Pensacola.
That's exactly why I mentioned the second half of last year, not this year. But we have an agenda. We have an agenda here.
Yeah, in Serna's case, right now he is slashing he's really even below Jazz territory at the moment. He's slashing 224, 258, 276. So not really hitting for any power whatsoever right now. But he is getting valuable shortstop reps in Pensacola right now, mainly playing shortstop at the moment for them. He's on the 40-man roster, but we're unlikely to see him this year. Somebody that really planning on in 2026 for Serna to come up, and somebody that I still hold in high regard. Yeah, but if we want to be somewhat balanced in our analysis of this, his slow start to this season is a little bit surprising and disappointing, but it's a small sample, so we'll see where he goes from there. Now we have to get into the defense a little bit with Agustín. And the question about how he fits moving forward with this organization. He has a golden opportunity right now to catch. Isaac talked about it. He's basically going to split the catching reps with Hicks and probably going to DH occasionally on days when he's not behind the plate. So it's going to be an adventure as a catcher. I've watched a lot of him. I wouldn't say I've watched every game of his as a catcher in the organization, but there've been a handful where I've watched every single pitch of him behind the plate. And he's a guy that at the most fundamental level just struggles to catch the ball consistently at the rate that you usually expect at a major league level. He catch most pitches, you don't notice the difference, but if you really watch an entire game, there's just a lot of examples of issues simply closing his glove at the right time, the most fundamental thing that a catcher does. It also extends to being able to adjust his body on pitches that are above the zone or below the zone. So it leads to a lot of pass balls. He has more pass balls than anybody else in minor league baseball this year. So that is, it kind of speaks for itself. It was an issue in the past, and it continues to be a flaw. There are also, if this is something that's not reflected in his numbers, but the wild pitches that happen when he's behind the plate, all those borderline calls that could go against him, but instead go against the pitchers that he's working with. It's hard to quantify that, but like the jumbo shrimp throw, there are a lot of receivable balls, in my opinion, that he doesn't adjust to quickly enough, and that leads to extra bases. And then there's the real head-scratching one that seems more fixable when it comes to controlling the running game, because he does have a good arm and a relatively accurate arm. There's just a lot of times where on the transfer, he drops the ball as well, and he doesn't give himself a chance because of his technique in terms of transferring the ball and getting rid of it on stolen base attempts. He gets just a little bit anxious in those situations. That's something that could probably be coached up and improved moving forward, but for now, there's somewhat of a limitation there. So then on top of all that, it's just been fascinating that all of his defensive reps this year have come at catcher. He has experience in the past as a first baseman very intentionally since he got traded over. He has not played any first base. He has only been a catcher. I just want your take on that, Sean, where you have a guy that he can play this critical defensive position, but he's not good at it. And the team has focused all his energy on trying to learn this position, but not preparing him to be versatile and fill other spots on the field. Just what do you think of the way that they've handled that, to focus all his attention behind the plate instead of preparing him to be able to move around a little bit in case catching doesn't work out?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if I was in charge or something like this. That's my approach. But maybe it's not too shocking, right? Because of the report that Alex Carver put out, how the Marlins are not having their catchers, call pitches and relying on the dugout. It could be very possible that this new Marlins staff a year in is clearly not that they don't value catcher defense, but maybe it's not as high as a priority besides framing for them, and they're more interested in just having a bat. I mean, look at Liam Hicks, who they took into Rule 5, who's definitely a bat first catcher, but without the power. Agustín, who they clearly targeted in the Jazz trade, that was the headliner of the Jazz trade, is a bat first catcher. So it could just be their approach, and maybe they're not worried about it. I think it's also kind of shown at the major league level because teams so far have ran on the Marlins catchers relatively well. I don't know if that's an indictment on the Marlins catchers, or if it's on the pitchers, or if it's the organization just being like, I don't care, just throw the ball, don't worry about the base runners. But it could just be a broader organizational trend that it's developing in front of us. But, if the Marlins are okay with, let's say, out of an 80 grade scale, 40 grade defense, if the bat is playing at a 55 grade, then that's just a decision that they've made. And I guess time will only tell if it works out or not. But I think it's a larger organizational trend.
Yeah. This is, even though he's just getting called up now and is a rookie, it's a tight window for him to actually prove himself as a catcher because they have Joe Mack breathing down his neck at AA. We haven't confirmed this yet. We think it's likely he gets bumped up to AAA in the near-term future to kind of fill the void, and also lining him up to debut in the near future, a guy that is certain to stick at catcher and will be, in an ideal world, he'll be getting most of the reps there at the big league level by next year. So it just puts Ramírez in a fascinating spot. There's a lot of value if he's a good DH, but it's certainly, he'd be more valuable to another team if another team sees him as their solution at catcher moving forward. Not to look too far ahead, it's just a reality that two of the best prospects in this organization right now happen to be catchers that are one that is just reaching the big leagues and another that's relatively close to getting there. I was curious, not to put you on the spot, Nate, in terms of are there any player comps that come to mind with Ramírez? Not necessarily catchers, but as a hitter, what type of hitter do you think he could become in a, not necessarily his ceiling, but a pretty good scenario? If things work out well, is there any hitter that he reminds you of in the big leagues right now?
From his swing, he's certainly, it's an awkward swing, but honestly, from the finish, it kind of gives you Marcell Ozuna vibes. I'm not gonna lie, just with the way he finished with his hand, I think that'd be a perfect scenario if he ends up like Marcell Ozuna. I mean, plenty of bombs, I think he has Silver Slugger himself, so that'd be, if we're going right off the top of the head, I think Marcell Ozuna would be a pretty good comp. Swing the bat pretty similar. If he didn't just find gaps like Marcell does, I think, and Marcell Ozuna, not like he used to be. He's not good defensively anymore. So I think that's not off the top. I think that's not that bad. I'd be very pleased with the Marcell Ozuna ceiling if I'm Agustín.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because I think that is a good one. The name that kind of came to mind to me was Teoscar Hernandez as a hitter, but I think Ozuna is even a closer one for whatever reason. But I mean, both of them are guys that have power to all fields, and in this case, Ramírez showed in the minors that he could be a little bit more patient than even Ozuna or Teoscar is. It's just you don't know. It'd be a little bit overly optimistic in terms of how that translates to the big leagues. I think the question is how much swing and miss there is. That's kind of the difference between Teoscar and Ozuna. Ozuna is somebody that's really aggressive, but also a solid contact hitter, whereas Teoscar for his career is kind of flirting with that 30% strikeout threshold where you have to be really powerful and really productive in run scoring situations in order to be a middle of the order bat that way. And he happens to be that level. But there's a little bit less margin for error if you're striking out that much. I agree. That's kind of in that mold. That's why there's so much excitement about this, because the Marlins have not graduated somebody from their farm system like this since maybe Ozuna. I mean, I'm trying to think about more recent years where they've had one of their own guys come up that has that kind of ceiling as a run producer. There haven't been very many. So that is why there's a lot of intrigue about at least the offensive side of this. Not to be overlooked, the stolen base side. He's the only catcher in the minors last year that had a 2020 season, home runs and steals. And he stole bases at a good efficiency. He's stealing bases this year, 5 for 5 in a really small sample. He's not quick, but he is somebody that, at least in certain situations, is more willing to run than we're used to seeing from catchers. No offense to Liam Hicks, but that's something that Liam Hicks is not quite capable of providing. That's one element that it's able to, it matters. If he's able to translate that at some level in the big leagues, that matters for a guy that is going to be on base a lot to get himself into a scoring position.
Yeah, I don't think it's so fascinating with him because it seems like he has such a feel in baseball IQ. Like on the bases, at the plate, he has such a discipline, and he's so mature beyond his years, honestly. And then catching, it's just there's some sort of disconnect. Like he just can't catch the ball. He has I think 21% caught swing percentage so far this year. it's just weird. Which I think if he gets more confidence, if he gets the big league reps and a coaching staff that really just believes in him, I think it could change. But I think that's just fascinating, worth pointing out.
I think a player, to go back to the player comps really fast, that I want to know if you guys agree, maybe like a Mitch Garver type of catcher, which is very, hitter first. He's basically now a DH in Seattle, backup catcher, DH player. So I feel like not the swing or aesthetically not the same player, but maybe the best outcome is that high producing Mitch Garver for Agustín Ramírez.
Yeah, that was one of the first names that came to mind when they acquired him, in terms of that, when you take into account the positional aspect of it too, where he gets a chance to catch early in his career. And with Garver, it was a really interesting mixed bag, where I think there were certain years where he graded out as an amazing framer, and that lifted up his whole defensive value profile for a while. But now he reached this point where, as you mentioned, he's still in the big leagues and he's still an emergency catcher if needed. But he just he's not used very much in that situation. Yet he's had a very long career, all things considered. So I think that's more realistic outcome in terms of career production and value. If he's able to go above that into the Ozuna, Teoscar territory, that'd be a home run. But baby steps, considering the track record of this hitting development in recent years that we've seen. We can now turn the page a little bit to the series itself against the Reds. Let's look at this initial lineup for the Agustín and Ronnie Simon era. It has begun. They are here with Agustín in the number 6 spot, Ronnie Simon batting 9th and DHing, as we've covered right here. X in his usual spot in the number 1 place, but basically everybody else, it has been a constant churn. 22 games, 22 different batting orders that the Marlins have used this season. That number is going to keep going up. That streak is going to stay alive, because now you have Agustín in the mix. You have Ronnie Simon in the mix, guys that obviously haven't played to this point and weren't even part of previous teams. Anything stand out to you, Sean, about what we're seeing here? This is against the lefty Nick Lodolo, mostly right-handed lineup, with Jesus Sanchez. He's the one lefty that's in this spot, given this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the relatively normal, lineup versus a lefty pitcher. I like Wagaman batting second. It's probably the Marlins' best hitter against lefties, at least so far this year. What's interesting to me, obviously, is Ronnie Simon being 9th. I also think he's the first switch hitter for the Marlins this season, if I'm correct.
You're absolutely not correct, because X is a switch hitter.
Oh my God! What am I thinking? that was bad. Yeah, but playing him DH is interesting. We'll see where he plays. Going forward. I believe you mentioned left field, or Isaac mentioned left field will be where he's playing. Yeah. But to me, this is just what I expect from a left-handed pitcher on the mound versus the Marlins. So I'm looking forward. Hopefully Dane can have a good series. I feel like he's been off to kind of a slow start this year, so I'm really eyeing in on Dane this series personally.
Yeah, Agustín number 6. It's. I was wondering how Sanoja and Simon are going to blend together, because both of them have a ton of versatility. And to this point, I mean, Sanoja playing. It's interesting that Simon mentioned left field, because now Sanoja has been playing left the past couple of days, and I don't think there's a wrong answer in terms of how to use them. These are guys that have a lot of versatility, but frankly aren't great at any one spot. Like, their value is the fact that they can play a lot of different positions, but one of them needs to be the backup to X at shortstop, and I guess the backup to. I think Graham Pauley is still hanging around this roster as well. Tough break for him, where he's kind of just stuck on the bench, whether it's a righty or lefty. Doesn't really have a role on this team at this particular moment. Anything else that sticks out to you, Nate, about how these guys line up?
A lot of kids, man. This is probably the most excited I've been to watch a Marlins game all year outside opening day. I'm not going to lie. You got, pretty much everyone outside of Wagaman is a young guy that could have future on this team. Mainly X, Norby, and then you got Agustín. And we haven't talked a lot about Ronnie Simon, but I've been really intrigued with what he's done this year in Jacksonville. Peter Bendich brought him in, knows him from the Rays. He got more reps than a lot of NRIs did in spring training. He was pretty much out there every game, at least from what I saw. So he looked all right, and then he gets to Jacksonville. He has a 960 OPS. He had 1 homer this year, and it looked like it was 150 off the bat. I mean, he hit the absolute hell out of it. So I'm excited to watch him play baseball, man. Versatile guy, can do a lot for you. So I'm not expecting too much, but if it looks like he just pretty much bailed in his approach and just is going to hit the ball as hard as he possibly can. Recipe for disaster, maybe, but if he makes contact, watch out for this guy. So I'm excited to watch him. And of course, Sanoha coming off the big day last night. Or yesterday evening, I should say. So up and down this lineup, I'm just excited to watch all these guys play.
Yeah. The one notable absence is Kyle Stowers, which I think is just a routine day off. He'd quietly started 16 straight games prior to today. Gets a day off, but he's going to be back in there moving forward. We touched on it earlier. It's going to be it's like 3.5 outfielders on this roster at the moment, where it's Sanchez, it's Dane, it's Stowers, and then it's the utility guys, Sanoha and Simon, just filling in whatever blanks there are right there. But yeah, Stowers usually clogs up a spot, even against lefties. He's been especially good against lefties. So it is interesting timing to have him take this day off when he's been awesome, even at a platoon disadvantage this season.
Yeah, I think just comparing Otto Lopez and Ronnie Simon, just from how their data looks, they seem like they're relatively similar players, obviously in terms of the bat. So that would be nice if Ronnie Simon can give the Marlins Otto Lopez like a production. I mean, that's a really, really decent piece for the Marlins, especially because Simon, as you said, can play multiple positions. Nothing great, obviously Lopez is awesome at second base, but that would be really nice.
And we have reached a point. I don't think we've officially given it on air, but a lot of people owe apologies to Eric Wagaman and how solid and productive he's been so far this year. He's deservedly hitting in the number 2 spot of this lineup right now, especially against lefties. He'll be in there against all lefties moving forward and occasionally against righties as well. It's an interesting, as excited as people are about Agustín Ramírez, there's like some similarities in terms of batted ball quality and approach between him and Wagaman. Like Wagaman isn't nothing. He's a guy that has that for what they signed him for on a split contract. He's somebody that has, after an initial rough week and a half, he has quickly justified his roster spot, made Jonah Bride expendable, and now he is. I remember, Sean, when you were putting together that like optimal lineup article, I think you had Bride as like the number 2 hitter on this team, and like Wagaman has basically been who we thought Bride was going to be, right?
Yeah, I thought Bride was a perfect spot for the 2-hole because you get a guy that gets on base. He pulls the ball. It's a reliable hitter to bat second. So the guys deeper in the lineup that are run producers can try to bring in Edwards and Bride at the top of the lineup. So, Bride's obviously not here any longer. He's in Minnesota. So Wagaman taking that position, I think, is really nice. And also, Wagaman definitely has more pop in his bat than Bride does, more consistent pop at least. Bride's only real path to getting home runs was to pull it. Wagaman has all field power. He hasn't necessarily shown it yet, but it's in there. It's obvious. He's a big guy. So I think he's a really nice hitter to have in the tool, especially against lefties. He's going to get on base. So,
yeah. Well, and just one last thing for me, just on Agustín. Like, he kind of ruins the vibe a little bit of this lineup, where it's so many guys that were undervalued or expendable by the previous organizations or acquired on the cheap somewhat. Whereas Agustín, he was the headliner of the Jazz trade, so there's always going to be relatively high expectations on him. Whereas most of these other guys, it's like anything you get is gravy because of how small the investment was to acquire them in the first place. And yeah, Agustín comes with a different level of expectation because of how they got him and obviously what he's done in the minors to this point. Quickly on to the red side, everybody knows about Ellie batting the number 3 spot right there. Matt McLean is back after missing all of last year due to injury, or almost all of last year. Other than that, it's a lot of the guys they had in 2024. Gavin Lux is new. Austin Hayes is new. Trevino is new, coming over in an offseason trade. Other than that, it's a lot of familiar faces that they had. New manager, of course, Terry Francona in his first year with them. They put up a ho-hum 24 runs yesterday against the Orioles. Some of that was off position players, so that juiced the total a little bit. Still, I think that is about as high a run total as we've seen any team score so far this year. So Nate, we touched on like the starting rotation for the Marlins struggling a lot. Max has been an exception to that so far, but this is a pretty big challenge for him in terms of an offense that on its best days can be really explosive.
There's a whole lot of red in that sprint category, and that that scares me a lot. I'm not going to lie. Matt's has been, not the best. Eddie either. And with Odyssey on the play, I'm not it might be another recipe for disaster. But yeah, man, outside of Ellie against the Marlins, I'm just going to read a couple stats off real quick. He's OPSing 1,600 in 7 games with 4 homers and 5 doubles. So he went nuclear last time he was at Lone Depot Park. So hopefully they can do the opposite of that. But that guy's an amazing player, man. I'll just touch on Noelvi Marte, who had 7 RBIs yesterday. Former highly touted prospect, came over from Seattle, and he's been playing a lot better this year. So decently deep lineup. Austin Hayes, you mentioned, who was a former Royal and a veteran. So. And Jade Fraley, of course, who destroyed the Marlins back in 2023. I will never forget that he did kill the Marlins very hard that series. But yeah, up and down, decent lineup, and I'm mostly worried about how many bases they're going to swipe.
We'll take a peek now at the probable starters that we have the next 3 days. Meyer versus Lodolo tonight. Eddie versus Brady Singer tomorrow. Brady Singer, who, to my eyes, he's looked really good this year in his first year coming over from Kansas City in the Jonathan India trade. And the series finale, getaway day matinee with Sandy and Andrew Abbott right there, who has had his moments. But yeah, with Sandy, he continues to be a just really confusing story to this point in the season. We touched on it earlier, just how awful he was in his previous outing. And then you zoom out overall this season, the velo is down a little bit from where it was even in spring training. It just hasn't been very good at all ever. Aside from really those first few innings on opening day where he looked totally back to normal again, ever since then it's been pretty mediocre in terms of both getting hit and more so with his commands and getting himself into pretty bad counts. Yeah, yet another test for him. I'm not somebody that's going to panic on him because he has exceeded expectations almost every step of his career from the very beginning coming with the Marlins. So I'm not somebody that's going to doubt a mini slump with him. It's just a matter of when the mini slump gets too long. So this is going to be his 5th start of the year. And just given what people think about him, the ongoing conversation about him as a trade candidate, there is going to, at the very least, he's going to have to be better than he was against the Phillies. Otherwise, there's going to be a pretty big freak out, not just around the Marlins, but across the league in terms of what he's going to do here. And this is a Reds team that their bullpen is getting a little bit healthier, but it's something that's not all that intimidating. They've blown some big leads already so far this season. And we touched on the running game and the role that the pitchers play in controlling that running game. The Marlins have allowed more steals than any other team in the majors. Eddie and Sandy in particular are they tend to neglect runners on base, and they don't really speed up their deliveries in a way to give their catchers a chance. So it comes down to the pressure on them to actually execute in those situations. That was on display pretty clearly in Eddie's last start against the D-backs that came up previously. I think he allowed 5 steals within the first 4 innings of that game to make matters worse and put extra pressure on himself. But this is the opportunity for somebody other than Max to actually step up, because nobody else is giving this team length aside from Max at this point. Yeah, I think other than that, we can now go to prediction time for this 3-game set here in Miami.
This is prediction time.
I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I'm really good at this.
Final segment of the show, as we always do. How many games the Marlins are going to win? Who's going to be the series MVP? We could quickly look at, let me bring up the overall leaderboard first for people to see, where we keep track of what our staffers do, our super subs, and our live stream guests. Here it is at the moment. I really hurt myself in the previous series, having faith in the Marlins to pull off an upset, so I'm way towards the bottom. But Nate had a productive series. I think Kevin went perfect right there. So you guys are in the top 10 overall, but it's dominated by our super subs at the top. FishOnFirst.com/subscriptions if you want to support what we do. And then we track your points and your predictions every single series all season long to have this fun competition, regardless of whether the team wins or loses. Yeah. Daniel is our reigning champion. He'll be back on the stream coming up for the Mariners series. And I think I have his predictions already sent in advance. But first, we will go to our press box report. We have Isaac, Kevin, and a special guest at Lone Depot Park.
Alrighty, Marlins and Reds series predictions. I'm going to say that the Marlins will take 2 out of 3, and Eric Wagman will be the series MVP. Alrighty, I'm going to go with the Marlins win 2 out of 3 as well, and I think that Jesus Sanchez is going to have a monster series and win MVP.
I think the Marlins take 2 out of 3, and how about a bounce back start for Sandy on Wednesday? He's the MVP of the series.
Alrighty, back to you, Eli.
And I don't know why, but Kevin didn't introduce his guest that was on that segment. That was Jeremy Taché of Dan Le Batard Show and FanDuel Sports Network Florida fame. So he's at the ballpark today. There's more media than usual at this series opener, and I think a lot of that is due to the Agustín call up and seeing how that's going to go. So thanks to Jeremy for participating in that for the first time in a couple of years, based on our memory. I think the last time he did one of those was back in 2023. Some super sub thoughts that we're getting right now. It's pretty split down the middle from what I saw earlier today between the Reds and the Marlins winning. Several Elly De La Cruz MVP picks, several Dane Myers MVP picks in there as well. And of course, at least one for Agustín Ramírez in his very first series as a big leaguer, trying to catch the Reds by surprise and come out of the gates swinging and being really productive. And we think he'll start at least 2 games in the series, with Hicks probably catching Sandy in the series finale. That being said, let me cue up the music. Go to you guys for your predictions here. Starting with Sean. Bring you up. There you go. Tell us what you have in mind.
Okay, so I am wearing a Reds cap, but I'm going to go with the Marlins 2 out of 3, and my MVP pick will be a Red. I'm going to go with Jake Fraley for this series.
Okay, Nate.
I hate being pessimistic, but I think the Marlins will drop 2 out of 3 here to the Reds. Big reason why, I'm going to say it again. Elly De La Cruz, 7 games against the Marlins, 1,600 OPS, hitting .500, 8 RBIs, 16 hits. He's going to keep rolling, swipe a couple bags, and he's going to push the Reds over this time.
I will go with the Reds in this series, taking 2 out of 3. Wait, especially with this Marlins staff, it is just hard to trust them to limit runs when it's so right-handed heavy as a staff and with so many guys being inconsistent outside of Max Meyer. I think the Reds take 2 out of 3 in this one by just outslugging the Marlins and outrunning them, more importantly, over the course of these next 3 games. It's a pretty good formula to go with a left-handed hitter on the opposing team as the MVP, just given the way that these teams line up platoon-wise. I'll go with Gavin Lux, right in the middle of that order, off to a decent start to the season after being in the wilderness with the Dodgers the previous few years. I think Gavin Lux is going to pop off and do a lot of damage over the course of these 3 games, dropping the Marlins to what would be 4 games below 500 before they head out on the road again. Fish on First Live, thanks for tuning in with Nate and Sean. Eli Sussman, joined earlier by Isaac Azut. Good to see all of your comments in there. Brian, always extremely optimistic. Sorry for accidentally banning him from the chat earlier in the show. I pressed the wrong button. That's what happens when you try to host and produce. You just get a little out of sorts and disorganized on stuff. But yeah, presented by About the Fans, aboutthefans.com, and you can see our collection right at the top of the page. Shop what we're doing. I think the next idea for merch has to be Agustín related, as long as he has a couple nice moments in the big leagues and just does what he's capable of doing. I think that will be a pretty popular selection. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I think we're going to be back on the off day before the next series instead of waiting for late Friday night. Probably on Thursday, 6 p.m. is when we'll do the Mariners series preview on the next Marlins off day. Hope you guys tune in for that one. And yeah, thanks for supporting what we do. Go Panthers as well. I'm not a hockey guy, but that shows in the scheduling. I think we're going to do the next stream on the same day as Game 2 of the Panthers series. But you're a Panthers guy, Sean, right?
Yeah, I like the Panthers, yep.
How do you like their chances in the first round?
I mean, listen, I'm an optimistic Panthers fan. Right? I'm not as knowledgeable as I am with baseball or football, but you know what? 2 straight Stanley Cup appearances, the reigning champs last year. They got playoff experience, so I'm always feeling good about the Cats.
I'll take your word for it. But thanks for joining us on the stream. And yeah, we'll be back later this week. A lot of content between now and then. Fishonfirst.com to get all of it. I've been Eli Sussman. As always, go fish.
Fish on First has partnered with About the Fans to launch a merchandise collection. Rep the FOF logo in more Marlins-inspired apparel. Find it all at aboutthefans.com. Enter coupon code FOF10 at checkout to get 10% off your order. FOF10 for a 10% discount.